Hi, I'm Melanie Bounds, and the title of my paper was Let Me Off This Thing, How to Balance the Work-Life Seesaw. So I want you to think about the phrase, life will be easier or life will be better. When? When you finish this degree program, or you get a raise or a new job? How about when the kids are grown? Well, life will be better when we have kids, or we can afford a bigger house or a new car. There's always all of these things that we think about all the time, and we think about them and we daydream as a way to relieve the stress of what we're feeling from our work-life pressure, right? Because that seesaw, that work-life balance is just not there, and we're feeling that stress. So I started thinking one day, is it possible that we're creating that stress? Is it possible that everything that I'm stressing about and all the ways that I begin to stress thinking, wouldn't it just be nice if I could just win the lottery? All of those kinds of things, is it possible that it's causing more stress and it's just causing us to completely miss out on all the good things that God has for us within this life and all the enjoyment and so forth that He intends for us to find? So my paper explores the balance of work and home that many 21st century families face. And I took a look at what the current research says about the growing changes in families and possible ways to refocus on things that are truly important to us. 40 years ago, when I was in elementary school, I was in a traditional family, as were probably about 99% of my friends. Mom stayed home, Dad worked outside the home, and my brother and sister and I knew no different. All of our friends knew no different. We could go to any house in the neighborhood. The kids weren't with babysitters or at daycare. The kids were at home with Mom. And that's the way it was. That was normal life. You've seen, the TV shows, Leave It to Beaver and all that. That's the way life was. But that's changed. And in 1990, there were only 25% of American families that were traditional families. And in 2010, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, that figure of traditional families in the United States was less than 7%. So this has changed. Why has it changed? Well, partly it has changed because there's been an increase in single-family households. And partly it has changed because more and more women are going out and finding that meaningful career and trying to find a life outside. They want more than just marriage and family. And there's nothing wrong with that. Part of it, though, is simply because as inflation has gone up, unfortunately, the cost of living has increased, but our wages have not increased at the same rate. And as a result, many two-income households are two-income because it takes both incomes in order to put food on the table and keep a roof over everybody's heads. But regardless of the reason, when you've got job and home, there's some tension there, right? Of course there is. So the paper explored that balance, okay? And I wanted to look at some of these things. So my theory for my paper is that while stressors are external, the stress itself is actually internal. And it's actually just based on our reactions, our individual reactions to all of these external stressors. So when an individual encounters several external stressors from both work and home, this creates an imbalance that impacts both of those systems. And this imbalance can lead to family problems, job problems, and in some cases, some serious health issues. My hypothesis for my paper was that setting priorities and having appropriate coping mechanisms in place can actually allow individuals to be proactive and not reactive to these external stressors. And by being proactive, this actually helps to reduce our stress and helps us to maintain a healthy work-life balance. So the results of my literature review was that the literature supported my theory that work-life stressors are external forces, and the stress experienced is really because of internal conflicts that we experience. The literature suggested that setting priorities, being willing to make trade-offs, and coming up with some good coping mechanisms can actually help us as individuals find a healthy work-life balance. So when you think about all the external forces around you and all that stuff, how often does it cause an internal conflict? Think about it. You went out and, you spent an hour and a half out at lunch, but you had to work an hour over because lunch was only 30 minutes long. So you have to flex that time, so you work that hour over, but then you're an hour later getting home, which means you're an hour later for Little Peter's you're cutting it close to make it to Little Peter's Little League baseball game, in which case now you've got your wife sitting there looking at her watch going, you're going to be late again, he's going to be late again, all these different types of stressors, and they do blend together, and it does So we have to find ways to make some of these things work. So some of the possible things, according to the literature, that we can do is set our priorities. The focus should be on what we need and not what we want. Even God says that He is there to supply all of our needs according to His riches and glory, not all of our wants. If that were the case, I would have won the lottery without having to buy the ticket, right? But He didn't. He will supply all of our needs. So we need to focus more on our needs and not so much on what we want. So one of the ways you can do that is start looking at things that you can change. For instance, if you've got a high debt to income ratio, what can you cut out of there? Is it possible that you could drive an older model car and have a smaller car payment? Is it possible that instead of buying the 4-bedroom home with the family room and the formal living room and the formal dining room and the finished basement, could you manage with the eat-in kitchen and the living room and 3 bedrooms and just have more family time like that? Is that possible, at least for a while, to help reduce some of that stress? Excuse me. If you both work outside the home and there are children involved, is it possible that you could find a way to make that work? What can you do to kind of share that household chores? For instance, if one of you gets home early and starts dinner, while that one cooks dinner, can the other one start a load of laundry and do homework with, little Chrissy and Johnny? Those kinds of things, and make that balance work. The important thing, though, is to really focus on what it is that's important. So, for instance, at work, like we talked about, if you have a 30-minute lunch break, take a 30-minute lunch break. If cutting commute times can make a difference too. Is it possible to move closer to work so you cut your commute time, and that can add as much as an hour or two to the time you have with your family every day, which could be important. The other issue is to reserve your weekends or your days off for your family time. So if you have Saturday and Sunday off from work, don't go into the office for a few hours on Saturday morning. Saturday or Sunday should be family time, and take that time to do things with the family, meaningful things. An interesting study that I did focused on how we balance work and home between men and women, and it is different. Men reported they felt pressure from social circles to focus more on work, and women felt more pressure from their social circles to focus more on home. The idea, though, is to try to work together. Working mothers have a more difficult time doing this, and that's what they call the superwoman syndrome. So moms, don't be focused on that. You don't have to do it all. It's okay to share it, and sometimes it's okay to say, nope, I don't have time for that and I can't do it. So the other option is that you could actually start looking at other things too that you can cut. For instance, if you lead a Bible study on Wednesday night and work with the youth group on Sunday nights, and you're trying to coach Little League, pick one of those and maybe cut out 2 of them. Pray about it. Figure out where it is that God wants to use your talents. So in conclusion, when does life get easier? Well, really, according to the literature, life gets easier when we make the necessary changes to make it that way. Our individual choices directly affect the balance between our work and life whenever we're faced with external stressors. So just remember that. Sit back, take a deep breath when you hit those external stressors and say, okay, I'm going to be proactive. I'm going to set some priorities, and I'm going to set my personal boundaries at home and between home and work. And that's the important thing. And one last hint I'm going to leave you with. Just make God the center of your life. And usually when that happens, everything else kind of falls into the right place. So thank you very much. God bless, and good luck with the rest of the semester.